And we are live. So hello and welcome to the Permaculture Vine podcast, episode 100. So we had a century. That's Permaculture Canada, Lindsay and Graham. Welcome, guys. What's happening? How's things, Graham?
Everything is grand, except it's hot. It's hot, super hot in Michigan. Last 2 years, we've had only 2 days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and they were both 91 degrees. And so far this year, I think we've had 10 days above 90, and they've been like 94s and 95s and 96s and some 98s. And I'm trying to acclimatize again. But yeah, everything's good. The farm is producing abundantly here in Michigan. All kinds of stuff that's starting to be harvested. All of the annual vegetables are starting to come in. We've been harvesting salad greens, berries in abundance. Every kind of berry you can name, we've had some of already. So yeah, I'm really enjoying the productivity on my place now that I'm officially 11 years in since we moved here. And 7 or 8 years since I planted some of these things, they're all starting to produce. So I had my first ever apricot off one of my own trees. I had an abundance of sweet cherries, which was really cool. And I've had honeyberries for the first time, which was really pleasant. And I'm actually getting some blueberries for the first time because I've had the really unfortunate experience of killing them every year when I was planting them in the ground because my soil pH was so high. I would literally kill all my blueberries. Now I've got them all in pots, so very large containers with a nice acidic soil, a mixture of coconut coir and pine leaf mulch and peat moss and some sulfur for a good measure, and coffee grounds as the fertilizer. And I'm getting bunches of blueberries, and I'm really happy about that. So that's me right here. I got lots of work going on with install work, continuing with a lot of my customers, and working on lots of design opportunities as well, including doing the site visit just yesterday. We can talk more about that later. Lindsay's turn.
Right on. I am pulled over on the side of the highway right now, so pardon my background noise. I got a little doggy with me, and she's cool with this whole thing. But congratulations, Cormac, on 100 episodes. It's a feat. It's a lot of work putting these podcasts on. So I appreciate the effort that you're putting into it. You're bringing around voices from all over the place to share with everybody. So I just want to have some gratitude for your time and your heart in that. I'm out in Innisfail. I'm on my way up to Rocky Mountain House again. I've been visiting a lot of orchard producers. There's a lot going on in life, of course, as always. Looks like where I've planted my food forest out at my parents' house is needing a new home. So they are going to be selling their place and probably listing it in April. And I have I basically treated that land like a nursery over the past few years. So now I needed to find a new home. But just this morning, I went out to a farm in the foothills, just south of town, towards the Rocky Mountains. And I have an opportunity to collaborate with somebody that has 40 acres out there that they've said, here's a couple of acres, and here's a pond that is fed every season, every spring. The pond is filled, and he can help me prep the land. And yeah, so I just feel grateful that I got this little gift from the universe saying, you went your nursery and your babies need a new home. And then here's this gentleman that you met at a farm club, a couple years ago, that is basically giving you the opportunity to give your plants a new home. And I also need a new home too. So I haven't found a home for me myself yet. I'm in a transition point there, but that'll come. At least my plant babies have a new home. I'll stop there.
Yeah, exciting stuff. That was good timing. Right, so we'll get into the main topic today. So this is basically come about from my own circumstances where I can't do designs anymore because just of the time, and I can't seem to get like 2 or 3 hours focused time without interruption. So instead of fighting the universe, I'm just going with it. So I'll be stopping doing design work for a couple of years, and maybe a year or two. So what I'm going to focus on is basically trying to help people now decide if they have a property, they say, and they're not sure who to ask. Well, I'm taking on consults now to help people make that decision to get a design, how to find a designer, what they look for in a designer, and that's led to this topic tonight. So I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea. I'm going to give it a shot anyway, because it means I can just do 5 hours a week, try and get 5 consult slots. As you know yourself, there's work before it, work after it. So that'll get me, say, 10 hours work a week. And then hopefully then pass on designs to the likes of yourselves and other people where appropriate. So that means that's if they need a design. They might just need a couple of consults from somebody. So that's what I'm going to try and help people and try and be of service. So that's led to tonight's sort of topic. I suppose we could start is, what is permaculture design? It is very basic. Who wants to take that one on?
Sure, I'll take this one on. Permaculture design, man, is that changing? The world of permaculture design is changing in a huge way. So there's a lot of these words being pitched out about what permaculture design is, and it seems like the regenerative design is now kind of the way some things are going, but ultimately I think about it, I'm going to make up my own term, right? Like holistic design, where we're thinking about entire systems, we're thinking about relationships between people and the earth. But why is it important, or what is it? Do we want to start with permaculture?
Just basically, what is it? So it's just a very simple definition.
Yeah, so considering all the systems, considering the water, the climate, the land, the topography, the soil, the flora, the fauna, the fungi, the finances of the people, the community of the people involved, and creating something where you're creating a relationship between people and the lands they inhabit.
Yeah. Graham, do you want to chime in there at all?
Yeah, you bet. So I'll go back even a little bit further and more basic, and go back to the definition of permaculture. And having come from Australia, where permaculture was started, I guess, as a design science by Bill Mollison and David Holmgren. I'm not going to say that they invented it, because they clearly didn't. I've got a textbook on my shelf from the early 1900s called Permanent Tree Crops, which mentions the use of the words permanent agriculture. And Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, used permaculture to be a conjunction of the words permanent and agriculture, and also then ultimately the conjunction of the words permanent and culture. So really the focus became on perennial plants as an alternative to the monoculture annual cropping that was literally destroying all of the soil in Australia. So with a very, very shallow topsoil being degraded by dry land salinity, being eroded by the wind and the rain, we didn't have much to give up. I talk to people here, about how states like Nebraska have got 600 feet depth of topsoil that's been deposited by glaciers, etc. And Australia in some places doesn't have 6 inches. And so you got to really work hard to look after your soil and make sure you don't lose it to all those different events. And so Bill and David, thought that the use of perennial crops would avoid the annual rotations of tilling and spraying and all the other different activities that would cause erosion of the soil. That was the premise behind it. And so for me, it's still that focus on perennial plants that makes up the basics of permaculture. And how can you provide food, medicinal, pollinator attraction, and not have to dig up and plant everything over and over and over every year.
Great stuff. So for someone coming new to this, basically, I would say it's just looking at your property holistically and saying, right, looking at yourself, what time you have, and you want to design a system that works, that you're working with instead of working against, taking on your climate, taking on your circumstances, your ground, as you say, your soil, and how to how do we build that up so it makes it easier for you to achieve these things. So then the next question then is, what problems does it solve for people? So who would actually need a permaculture design? So I would say it could be property owners, it could be businesses with land that's lying there. They want to sequester carbon, help climate change. Yeah, it solves a lot of problems. It's a food growing system, so it brings in food. A lot of people now, as you say, perennials, balancing annuals and perennials. So you want to grow food, you don't want to use chemicals, you want to create safe family spaces. It can range from, again, urban properties, farms. Anybody want to jump in here? But like, basically, what problems does it solve?
I'd say quite a lot. I can't tell you how many times I've heard from people, they say, I wish I'd called you sooner. Right? That I hear that all the time. So really, if we could get in there when people are purchasing land, even helping them find the land, to make sure that they're choosing the adequate type of property for what their needs are. That's super helpful because we come with a great knowledge base, right? We're not just looking at one thing, we're looking at a whole bunch of things, and we're looking at the relationships between things. So there's quite a lot of skill, I believe, in permaculture designers, where we've learned how to witness patterns, and we've learned how to assess the needs and yields of the land. We've learned how to see how energy moves through the land in so many different ways. And that's a skill, and that's a learned skill. So to be able to have that lens and stand on the land and be able to, in a way, interact in a storytelling way, be able to read the story of the land through whatever plants are growing there is going to tell you about what's in the soil. You're going to see evidence of water movement after a rainstorm through the land. So being able to have somebody that can come to your property and witness it for what it is and pay attention to those stories that are subtle and can only be seen once you've trained yourself to look for these patterns, I think is very valuable. And I think that having that food security piece is becoming increasingly more important every single year, right? People are wanting to take care of themselves, but they're also starting to want to take care of their communities. So one thing in permaculture that when I took my design certification, at the end of the textbook, or the permaculture textbook, Bill Mollison gets into the community aspect of things. And I feel like this is where we're at right now. This is a huge ask of us, is how do you start and build community? And what are those things? And I think it's not a new concept, but I think that element within permaculture is something that is really coming to the forefront. Whereas before, maybe it was more about the food production. I'm seeing more of an ask around the community part, because I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but that's what we're here for. I think that, so for another example, when I finished my PDC, I joined an organization because I thought, there's so many subjects here, I can't be an expert in all of them. I need to be part of an ecosystem. I need to collaborate with others to do the best job that I can, so that I can pull on the knowledge of everyone with different skills. I'm never going to be skilled in all of these things. This is a community. This is like an organism type thing. So I feel like society as a whole is starting to see that within permaculture. And, it's subconscious, where it was, we got to get our needs met. We got to get our food, right? And then you have floods and fires, and then they're like, okay, maybe we should look at the water, right? And now it's like, how do we build community? We all want to do these projects, but we need more people. How do we find the people? I have land. How do I find someone to work it? So I find that really interesting. I know I totally went off on a tangent.
No, I think it's very relevant. I was there last week at a place called Wild Irish, where they're building an Irish cultural centre, I think, where people can meet. So they want people to come there and meet there, learn some language, but also have be like a retreat centre, and So that core function is an Irish retreat centre, but what they're doing is using permaculture to design it. So we were down marking out the land, using an A-frame, with lime, just to give them an idea. And that was by Neil Higgerty. And Neil was leading the workshop where he was teaching them how to read the land and how to read the water flow. And I thought that was really cool because it's not a permaculture site. It's an Irish cultural site, which is using permaculture. So I think that was, so they see the need to bring someone in who can read the land to give them the best use of the land. And I think that was a good example. Graham?
Yeah, I'll focus just on one aspect of problems that can be solved. And I worked in water treatment for probably 20 years as part of my career as a chemical engineer. And one of the companies I worked for recognized pretty early that water was going to be one of the resources. They said deliberately that they felt like wars would be fought over water in the future because of its scarcity for clean drinking water. And to some extent, that does occur in certain places. But if we look at water and its scarcity and quality, I think permaculture is a great way to solve a lot of the problems that we have within watersheds. And just using the example of the property that is around me here in Michigan, it was up until 2.5 years ago, it was just your typical corn, soybean, and wheat rotation on 160 acres of land. And it's sloping land, and there were forests that occupied the highest part of the land, where the first stream starts, at the top of the watershed. And when the solar folks came, they cut down that forest in order to put in some more solar panels and create some more acreage for the panels. And the very first thing that we noticed was two things. The erosion increased dramatically because the forest wasn't there to intercept the rainfall anymore. And the velocity and depth of the water coming down the stream increased dramatically because all of the water was running off. So that was a bad thing that they did, was cutting down the forest, as a means to intercept that water. But one of the good things that they did was that they planted the entire solar field with a range of cover crops, very similar to what we would use in pasture management for regenerative agriculture. So a lot of perennial grasses, clovers, some other native seeded grasses. And what we've noticed now is that the amount of water that is running off in heavy rainfalls is dramatically reduced, and it's also a lot cleaner. So that's just one example. At my place specifically on my property, I use a lot of mulch, and that has somewhat the same effect of being able to intercept and capture the water. And instead of it running off, it's then percolating through and getting into my subsoil and ultimately replenishing the groundwater table. And so, where I'm located is right at the headwaters of the West Erie Basin going into Lake Erie. And we have tremendous problems with fertilizer runoff and soil runoff, algae blooms taking place in the west end of Lake Erie. And there's a massive effort that is underway to try to plant lots of wildflower meadows, perennial crops, trees, etc., all up and down through the watershed in order to reduce the amount of runoff of those different nutrients and also the water. And so to me, that's just one example of what permaculture can do to solve a problem that's real, and one which has a great impact in terms of the quality and quantity of water that's being lost into rivers and streams, and putting it back into the groundwater table.
Yeah. So what we have, we have really all the crap that's happening in the world as well. If you, instead of watching that and getting scared and getting stressed and getting sick, it's a way of going out to your own land and your own property and actually doing something constructive. Is very I don't know what the word is, healing. No, it's good for your mental health. That fear, and then you can take control by growing your own food, looking after your own property, and learning how to capture water, treat water, and all them things. That you don't have to become a prepper, but there is things there that you can do. And at the end of the day as well, I think it is healthier for you, and learning these old skills and bringing them back into your everyday life will change your life. They certainly changed mine. and the way I look at things. So then the next thing then is why hire a designer? So you can go on YouTube University, learn about all this stuff. You could take a PDC, but then why hire a designer? I would say just you'll get there quicker, and with someone there guiding you as well, you'll avoid serious mistakes. And then a designer will have plenty of experience, plenty of designs done, and will be able to help you in your situation. Any other thoughts on why hire a designer, and even if you want, why hire Permaculture Canada?
Yeah, and I want to touch on what you were talking about just previous, and I'm going to get back to that. But you were talking about the mental wellness with people and having land. And, you know, for a portion of my life, there wasn't a piece of land to work or whatnot. And for a lot of people, there isn't. So these community projects that you talk about, right? That cultural piece that you mentioned, I love how you said that language was woven into the project and permaculture was woven into the project. So this working of the land and combining an element of something in the arts is something that I'm working on also right now. So I have the opportunity to bring in educators on native plants for a community garden project. The native garden's already fully grown, but my friend Christian Olin, who's the artist, she got a grant to do a mural. So we're combining our efforts to do a mural about native plants and bring in speakers, and it's going to be free because it's the funding is supplied by CADA, Canada Arts Development. So we're able to offer education to the community for free about both permaculture and the native grasses, and get them involved in painting the mural. So I think this element of the cultural aspects of community and how we weave in people that maybe have no interest in permaculture, right? Don't know what it is, don't know about food production, but maybe once they have an essence of what it is and what it means to be part of doing that, naturally adopt these things, right? Once people get their hands in the soil, they feel the natural healing effects. But maybe it was the art that called them in, right? Maybe it was the language, maybe it was the dance, maybe it was the music, right? But these are cultural quality of life things that are weaving people into the land again. So I just wanted to point that out because I think that's a really important piece of how do you build community, especially when it comes to regenerative or permaculture projects. Maybe it's not that aspect of focusing on what that is, but focusing on these quality of life pieces. And then to continue on with your actual question about the designers, like why would you hire a designer? So I'm doing site visits locally in my town. And it's obvious to me when I go and I visit people and I look at their land that there's a certain amount of knowledge there that maybe seems natural to me is not to the greater population at all, right? So simple things like where do I plant my annuals, right? Where do I plant my perennials? Just that little basis of knowledge, knowing the difference between bacterial dominant soil or fungal dominant soil. That's not a common thing for a lot of people. And it makes a huge difference on the success of your project, right? So I think the knowledge is one piece. The connectivity is another really important piece. So locally, I'm able to source plants, know who my producers are, know what their practices are, and actually guide them to somebody that is legit in my mind, right? You're not going to go to Home Depot and buy these plants that are sprayed from who knows what, from how knows how far away. We're able to be conscious of who is our local supplier, who are our bioregional resources, who's the best person to get the soil from. Because we're going to pay attention to, if you're going to get mulch, we're going to pay attention to, has this mulch been sprayed? Is it full of, some sort of fungal disease, right? We're taking extra care, I think, in terms of any landscape implementation, right? So this can go for even if somebody's just going for something that's showy, we're still going to take that an extra mile in terms of the ethical efficiency of the sources that we're getting our plants, our soil, and all of that from. And maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but that's really the goal of Permaculture Canada and why I started it, is to, you know, stand in the toroidal field of these people that I'm going to promote and actually know whose businesses I'm sharing and why, right? Because when I have opportunities to say, bring in an educator for this mural project, I have a multitude of educators I can now choose from, but I know why I would choose who I would choose and for what reasons. So I think integrity and ethics falls into working with permaculture designers in a big way as well.
Yeah, so from my perspective, Cormac, why would you pick a designer? You know, there's, as Lindsay said, a lot of knowledge that permaculture designers have gained as part of first doing their permaculture design certificate course. It is a design science, and so there's a lot of aspects of that, of, you know, what we're taught and what we've learned. No different than me being a chemical engineer. I had to go through a whole heap of 4 years worth of coursework so that I could get a certificate, so that I could go practice engineering. And that enabled me over a period of time to be able to design and build an oil refinery. Now, as a permaculture designer, I've got a certificate which enables me to go and do work and design people's gardens and farms, etc. And so inherent within that, there's a lot of knowledge that comes, you know, from the learning to get the certificate in the first place, but then also from the practice of it. And so a permaculture designer is going to have done a number of designs. You know, in my case, I'm up over 65 or 70 designs now that I've completed over the last 3.5 years in a wide range of climates in 4 countries. And so that's brought together for me personally a body of knowledge, which I can then use to help educate my next customer better based on what I've already learned from doing all of that prior work. So that the average person doesn't necessarily have access to all of the information, nor necessarily know how to find it. So part of what I do as well as a permaculture designer is provide that education on, you know, what resources can people use so that they can learn for themselves about their climate, about what grows in their area. The vast majority of my customers here in Michigan have actually come from someplace else, just like myself. And so they come here, they purchased a property maybe in the last year or maybe the last 5 years. And the first question I always get asked is, what can I grow here? Because I came from this other place where, you know, very much different plants were part of their backyard and their landscape. So having that knowledge, you know, as to what actually grows here in this region and, you know, in different areas across the country, I can answer those questions almost now right off the bat for folks and give them a long list of things that they can grow. And a lot of the folks are actually then looking for what can they do to grow food. Some folks, like a couple that I met yesterday, are really just looking to put in place native plants within their garden space, and wanted to have the, you know, the extra comfort that I would be able to help them find all of the stuff that was specifically native to Michigan and the Midwest region, as opposed to stuff that would just be coming from the local big box nurseries. So I really think it's that knowledge base that people are looking for in a designer that enables them to be guided in the decisions that they're going to make on their property. And it doesn't just come down to plants, but it comes down to, you know, what do you do with water? So again, as part of my engineering career, learning about water in the United States and the different laws that apply, I learned that at one point Colorado actually would not let you collect rainwater. And so there were laws that were put in place, you know, to stop people from harvesting rainwater off their roofs. And, you know, over time there was a campaign to change that law, but it's still limited to just 110 gallons of water that you can store in Colorado at any given time. So some very, very strange and different laws that exist from state to state in the US. And, you know, again, making that part of my knowledge base enables me to help people to skirt around the edge of those laws or creatively use that 110 gallons so that they keep emptying it and reusing it over and over, and enables them to still have, you know, the good use of rainwater capture as an example in a state that essentially prohibits it. So I think that's really what I think sets us apart from, you know, other landscapers or other aspects of agriculture, is that knowledge base, which is comprehensive across a wide number of factors that come as part of the PDC that we do.
Yeah, so you're basically buying someone's knowledge and experience, and saving yourself a heck of a lot of time and heartache. So then the next question is, what do you look for in a designer that you're hiring? So I would say designers cover the complete political spectrum as they do in real life. So if you're going to be offended by a certain politic, don't hire that person that has the politics. Go on Instagram and find it. I would advise you tend to avoid them, the extreme sort of cultish permaculture designers who will insist on giving you everything that you should be getting, but rather instead of everything that you need. So definitely during that exploration call, if you don't feel a good fit, trust your gut and run a mile if you don't like them. And then I suppose it's competence certificates, making sure they're qualified or they have experience. I don't think they necessarily need a PDC as long as they've been doing it 10 years in their area. I think that's just as good as if somebody with a PDC and no experience. And then try and avoid people who want to throw everything and the kitchen sink at it as well, who have seen videos, want hugelkultur, swales, what other permaculture, herb spirals, throw it all in. Any thoughts from you, Steve? What they look for in a designer or a design company, which is probably more relevant for yourselves?
I heavily rely on my intuition. So when working with people, feeling into the relationship with the person, I think is super important. Being able to communicate well, because that's a really important aspect about creating a design, is being able to hear each other and to be able to ask the correct questions to get the answers that you need. So I think right off the bat, being able to communicate and, effectively understand the process is really important. Because, like you said, Cormac, yeah, you can throw everything in the kitchen sink and not design, but what are they asking for? What do they really need, right? Maybe they don't need an entire design for their whole yard and everything. Right? Maybe they have their rainwater capture set up. Maybe they have an element of their gardens already figured out and they just need help on this one piece. So I think being able to gauge your designer in terms of are they listening to me? Are they working in the relationship that we're ultimately as designers working with the land, right? Is there this circular thing going on or not? So I think that's a really big piece. The other piece I would say is practical hands-on experience, taking a look at their previous work. Maybe they don't have the tech to have that sort of thing online, and that's okay too, right? A lot of people have 25, 30 years of hands-on experience and it's all up here. So it's not going to show in a portfolio type state. So talking to them about previous projects that they've done, maybe how they relate to your specific property would be a good place to start in terms of knowing who to go with. But ultimately, I feel like it's a hard choice and it's a resonant choice. Our bodies are vibing and we feel good and conversation. Like, do I want to sit down to dinner with you? Okay, let's work together, right? If I don't want you at my table, chances are we're not going to have the most cohesive experience working together. And I think that's important from both the person who is the owner of the land point of view and the designer who's pouring their life hours into creating something for this person as well. I think it's got to be circular and it's got to feel good.
You hit on making a choice of a design company, not just necessarily a designer. And, there's an important aspect of that, I think that we've touched on in some of the other questions, and that's a network of designers. So within Permaculture Canada, we have, experience working with, well over a dozen different designers, in our past work. And that enables us to capture the collective experience of all of those people and bring it to the table as well. So it's not just Graham's experience, it's not just Lindsay's experience, it's not just Cormac's experience, it's the collective experience of all the folks that they've worked with. So, I've made it a good practice. I know that each of you has as well to network with other designers. Go meet with them when the opportunity arises. And, that's always a special occurrence. I just had the opportunity of catching up with Cynthia Acebo down in Texas a week or so back, which was really special. Cormac, you're probably still going to be on my list for a while before I get to come and see you in person. But I'm now up to 7 or 8 different designers that I've been able to meet with, share a meal, shake hands, give them a hug, etc. And that's an important part of what we bring to the table for our customers. It's the experience of those people as well that we've worked with. So that's been very special for me to not just be the Lone Ranger in terms of doing design work, but to be able to work with all of those different folks. I could comment that it's also important that your permaculture designer has lots of gray hair, but Lindsay's actually got rid of hers again. So, it's not to be ageist, but, that experience counts for a lot. And, experience in a broad sector of permaculture. So, myself personally, I started practicing permaculture when I was about 13 or 14. I first read about it when I was on my parents' family farm, but it was only 3 years ago that I actually got my certificate. So to your point, Cormac, the experience that a person can have and gain, by the hands-on, as you mentioned, Lindsay, that can count for just as much or more than the actual certificate and course itself. And, being able to do a good design on paper needs to be complemented with the experience of actually working on the land. So in my case, I was fortunate. My parents had 53 acres in subtropical Queensland, and that, formed the basis for a lot of the stuff that I learned and then started to apply on my own different properties. Moving from subtropical Queensland, where we got 54, 55 inches of rainfall a year, to then Western Australia in the wheat belt, where I was lucky if I got 6, gave me a whole different range of experience again on water management. And so, all of those different levels of experience have come into play as part of my work here in the US and Canada and Mexico. And so I really think that's what you're looking for in a permaculture designer, is somebody who's got a balance of design skills. I always credit myself as being a competent but functional designer when it comes to putting the stuff on computer, whereas most of the other designers I work with, especially Lindsay, are able to do it very beautifully and artistically, as well as being functionally competent. So I like to be the person that can then go and apply all of that specifically to the land and interpret the design and put it in place in a way that meets all the customers' needs. And I've had a lot of fun doing that. So that's really, I think, the background of my experience is more working with the land as opposed to the design itself.
I think too, Graham. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I like how you said interpret the design, right? Because the installer really does interpret the design, right? The designer's there interpreting the land. If they're there on the ground, able to interpret the land, and if they're not, it's the installer who then takes that interpretation point over. So I just like that little piece. I want to point that out.
I was just going to say there that it's important to what you said, Lindsay, about having a meeting with people, because it's not ideally it shouldn't be like a one and done experience. It should be over a number of years where you're going to go back and implement it. Things are going to fail, so you're going to have to go back and see what worked, and sort of do it over a number of years. I think that's happened to you, Graham, a few times, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. 3 years of doing permaculture installation work here in Michigan. I've had to, blueberries. I mentioned how I've been killing them by putting them in the soil. Well, guess what? I did that at my customer locations as well. So I've had to fix that and correct it, by, taking the blueberries out of the ground, putting them in pots, providing the right pH, etc. So, that meant a change compared to, what the designer's intent was. If the design, just said blueberries, that doesn't necessarily specify whether they're supposed to be above ground or in the ground, unless you go through the process of looking at the soil pH. And, we don't always do that as part of design. We're not actually doing the physical testing. And what I've learned about soil pH is that, especially in places where there's a lot of construction that's going on, whatever database that you might have looked at for soil data doesn't necessarily bear out in the actual soil that's on the property, because they might have brought in fill for construction, and so we've got a great example of that, of 2 properties, literally across the road from each other. One of them sitting on a sandhill and the other one sitting on a mountain of clay. And they're essentially, on the same survey with identical soils listed on the survey. So, that's the part of it, making mistakes, you try to make the ones which are the least expensive. So that's part of what we try to do, is avoid mistakes, or make the inexpensive mistakes, not the very expensive mistakes. One of the things that I've had to correct is trying to work out a different way of dealing with deer. The first solution, the most obvious one, is to be putting fences up around properties. But as people get bigger and bigger desires for more orchards and bigger spaces, an 8-foot or 10-foot tall fence becomes a major cost component, and sometimes more than 25 or 30% of the entire project is fencing. So I try to make use of that when I can. If I have to build a fence that tall, I'll grow every kind of vining plant that I can on the fence to make use of that structure. But now I'm looking at other methods. How can I keep the deer out? Maybe I'll just put the fencing in smaller circles around the trees that actually need it, rather than around the entire garden. So that's really, I guess, an adaptation. Learning to go and do things differently. Another, you could call it a mistake, was an excessive amount of abundance that was created. I planted 5 raspberries at one particular location, and they've turned into like 300. And so, the customer there has been really, really happy with being able to harvest 20 or 30 quarts and pints of, raspberries on end. But then said, hey, can you dig some of these up and take them elsewhere? Because it's just a little bit too much for us. So that's really, I guess, some of the things I've had to encounter and deal with and adapt to.
Yeah. So if anybody needs help finding a designer or navigating this process, I am offering consults. So if you go to Vine Permaculture Product Consult, and I can help you out, find a designer, find even if it's just an introduction to permaculture, I'll look at your property and see what you actually need. You might just need a few consults with a designer, or you might need a full design if you help me up there. And then the next one then is I suppose it's over to Permaculture Canada for this, because I don't really have a formal design process in place. I just go through it. Lindsay, I think you have a process in place in Permaculture Canada. So what is the design process from the point of view that you have that initial call, whether it's a free strategy session or whatever, and then what's the customer experience like going through that?
Yeah, it starts with that conversation, like you said. So some people are booking online consultations. Otherwise, you're like talking on the phone or doing some sort of Zoom call just to kind of assess what the person's needs are, so that you're meeting their budget and being able to supply the help that you can provide given what they're ready for. So like I said earlier, it's not always the full-blown design. Sometimes it's more of a walk with me sort of program, and you're just doing things step by step. So I think having that option and communicating that to the person, like finding out what their biggest asks are, like what are 3 to 5 things that you're hoping to achieve? Why are you reaching out to me? Because knowing what people's why is super important. That's why they're coming to you, because they think that you are going to help them with very specific things that they're looking for. So I think being able to find out what those things are is super important. And then once you do know, you're either going to go the consultation route, and that can be like a single hour consultation. Of course, the designer is spending at least 3 hours. There's preparatory work that's done by the designer before the call. If they've decided to do this consultation, we're going to be looking up your property. We're going to be looking up where you are. We're going to be looking up anything that you addressed in your call that's going to help us prepare for the actual call itself. So there's a lot of preliminary work that goes into preparing a document. Then you have your consultation, and then after, then we address as many of those things that we can for you in that time allotted in a document that you're then given. So mine are usually like 10 to 12 pages long, and I don't know what other designers are doing in terms of their consultations, but that's what I'm looking at for the clients that I work with. And that's so they can do a single hour, they can do multi-hour, they get a bit of a discount there. And then from there you go into design projects that are based on the size of the design. So 1/4 acre, under an acre, 1 to 5, 5 and up, and that sort of thing. So being able to assess and find out which part of your land do you want designed, right? Maybe they have 40 acres. Well, I'm not going to design 40 acres of food forests for you unless that's really what you want. But most people, if I'm working for a farmer that's got a monocrop field, he doesn't need a huge forest to feed his family, right? Maybe we're doing just 1 or 2 acres out of a 40-acre project. So that initial conversation is to kind of outline how can we best work together to meet those needs that they've expressed, and be able to provide with them education, supporting documentation, ongoing help and maintenance, connections to people in their area that they can work with. So if we've done design, then we do that initial consultation. We do a design. We have a draft review so that before you're getting your final documents, you're able to look at what has the designer come up with in terms of what we talked about on our phone call. And is there something in the design that I feel needs to be amended? So we give the opportunity for the people that we're working with to give feedback on the design before we're saying, okay, we've done our job. Most of the time, everyone's really happy with what they've got. It's more than they can, perceive from just looking at a document. So it does require that conversation where you can go through the design as a designer and explain everything you've done in that design, which is why you made the choices that you've made. That's an opportunity to educate them into, this is your design. Ultimately, I want to empower you to feel like you can take the reins and make decisions on this in the future. And that's the clientele that I like to work with, is people that actually want to get their hands dirty and actually be involved with, getting that connectivity between themselves and their land. So that's important to me. After they have their design documents, we can help them find installers that are going to treat this in the proper way. We know they're not going to go in there and decide, I'm just going to put this over here and this over here, and I'm going to spray this with that, and I'm going to put gravel down instead of mulch, or things like that. We want to help make sure that they're getting the proper support to get the design in the ground. We don't want it to stop at a pretty picture. We want them to actually implement this into their soil and into their lives. So, and then from there, it's an ongoing relationship, right? Like you said, you don't want to just give you, here's the product and see you later, right? It's nice to continue that relationship and see how they've grown, because it's always really inspiring to hear back from people that are saying, this is how this has changed, and see their excitement and feel their joy for having achieved, bringing more biodiversity into their lands, and then also feeling empowered now to just take the reel and go themselves. Because that's ultimately, I'm in the business of educating people to feel empowered. This is our birthright to be able to grow food for ourselves, right? So being able to proliferate that, having a green thumb is this weird misconception, I think, that's come about, where it's not as difficult as people maybe think it is. So, yeah, I'm going to stop this soapbox there.
So that'll sort of lead nicely to you then, Graham, as an installer. What's the process for an installer, and what's the benefits over doing it themselves?
Yeah, so I think that the first thing, again, comes down to just the knowledge of the resources. So if you're planning on doing it yourself, which is an option, and some people are very hands-on and practical with their skill set and can do that. But by and large, the folks that are coming to us for design work are also looking for help with the installation. They don't necessarily have the knowledge of where did they buy all those 4x4, 12-foot long posts and the cattle panels in order to make a deer fence around their property. And then if they knew where to buy them, then they probably don't want to be the person that's digging the holes with post hole diggers, 3 feet deep, in order to put the stuff in the ground. So, really, my role is to work first with the designer. So Lindsay and I've had some good experiences, working with 3 or 4 customers in my local area. Somewhere I've done the design and the majority where Lindsay's done the design, because I've been too busy either with my farm or doing landscaping work where I can't really spend the time behind the desk. And Lindsay's put together a very fantastic design. And then my job is to come behind that and do an excellent job of implementing it. So we've got, I guess, 3 customers now in the local area where that's been the case, where Lindsay's doing the design and I'm doing the installation work. We've just completed one of those. And so one of those was a customer that really did enjoy their gardening, spent a lot of time in the gardening, knows all their plants, but wanted to have something else to complement what they already had, in terms of some fruit trees and some berry bushes. And I had put together, I guess, all the initial work to get us to the point of getting a design, and said, hey, Lindsay, can you do this one, please? Because you're really good at design, and I don't consider myself to be that good. So in any event, the design was beautiful. The customer was just absolutely delighted with the design. And, then the next question is, okay, what's next? And so as Lindsay said, we don't want to just leave them with a pretty picture. We want to leave them with food in the ground. And so the next part was for me to go back to that location, talk with the owner, with the design documents in hand, and then start to say, okay, is this what we want to do first, second, third? What's your budget, and understanding what they can spend at a given time, and then also understanding if there are things that maybe have changed in the duration between when they received the design and what they're currently thinking. And so again, there's a level of interpretation of the design that can occur. Lindsay's given me a lot of grace to use some poetic license when it comes to making minor changes to the design, and sometimes some major changes which require some consultation with the designer to say, okay, what were you thinking when you placed this here, and is it critical, or do I need to can I move it to another place without any problems? So there's that interaction that takes place as an installer, is going back to the designer to ask questions and properly understand and interpret things, and then also making sure you do the same in reflecting the customer's current needs, because they might change over time. And I've had that occur where the customers have come back to me. There was one where we were going to put in a greenhouse that she'd purchased, and she said, hey, it shows it being here on the design, but she said, I really think I'd like to move it over here because it's going to give me a different view compared to where it was placed on the design. And so we agreed we would move it. It made a significant change to the placement of 3/4 of the plants within the same permaculture design space. And so we had to make those changes. So the process: go visit with the customer, do the site visit, understand what their budget is and how you can meet that budget, or phase the installation work over 1 year or 2 years or 3 years so that you can meet their budget needs accordingly. And then it's a case of buying everything and getting the work done. So I have now got people who can help me with that. It's not just me. All my first installs were just me. Then it was me and my daughter, and then she got work elsewhere. And so it was just me again. And now I have Julia, my farm manager, to help me with that. And then her partner is moving up here next week. And so I'm going to have a team of 3. And then my daughter Lily is looking maybe to come over and help out as well. So I might have a team of 4 people here shortly, which will be great. So the actual physical work starts once you start making all the purchasing. So I always provide a written quote first to the customer to say, here's what I'm going to purchase, the quantities, where I'm going to get them from, what it's going to cost, providing them with terms and conditions so that they understand what they're getting with their installation work, what's covered by warranty and what's not covered by warranty. I have to explain to them, what kind of insurances that I carry in case I do damage to their property. Am I covered? Do I have workers' compensation insurance? That kind of stuff. So there's a lot of work that happens in between the design and putting the first shovel in the ground, which is, finding all the resources, purchasing all the resources, getting them delivered, getting everything on site, making sure the customer's in agreement with all the terms and conditions, etc. And then it's just hard physical work at that point. I don't think I need to describe all the different activities that I've gone through, but, it's a lot of hard labor. Sometimes I use machinery, sometimes I don't, depending on, accessibility more than anything else. But at the end of the day, the product that I create is the physical living example of the design that somebody like Lindsay or yourself have done, Cormac, or some of my own. And so that may not look the same as what the customer might have thought when they looked at the design. And, a perfect example of that is that, when you purchase a design, the design is done based on what the trees are going to look like at their mature size. And so a cherry tree here in Michigan might end up being 30 feet in diameter. It sure isn't 30 feet in diameter when I plant it. It's usually going to be like 5 or 6 feet tall and a couple, 3 feet in width, perhaps. Sometimes, like Lindsay's saying, I think, is that there's just a single stick until it leafs out. And so, I have to explain to the customer that maybe it's not appropriate that we put in place the 100 support plants that are supposed to go under that 30-foot cherry tree until it's larger in size, maybe 3-5 years from now, as it starts to branch out and leaf out, that we then put in the rest of the plants around it. So it's a constant process then of conversation with the customer to make sure that they understand those things that take time. I also have to explain to customers that, it's not appropriate to try to start doing installation work in the heat of August for lots and lots of different reasons. First, it's hard to get hold of the stock at that time of the year because most of the nurseries have run out of stock usually by June or July. So, really it's an education process with the customer to say, hey, we might want to start this work in fall when we have bare root stock available, or in the case of wildflowers, that's a good time to do the seeding operations for wildflower meadows. And so it's really a conversation that goes on and on with the customer to describe, these are the events that we can do next, and these are the ones that need to wait. And then ultimately, the very last part of it for me is to send them an invoice. And, that's where I get to, say, here's how much money that we actually spent. I'm usually pretty good about making sure that when I provide a quote, and I call them estimates, not quotes, my estimates are typically higher than what I actually end up spending, because I always prefer to make sure my customers are not needing to be asking for more money to pay for their installation. So that's that from an installer's perspective.
That's great. So if anyone wants to purchase the design, go over to Permaculture Canada.world, and you'll be able to look at all their services, help them out. Are you doing strategy sessions at the minute?
Yes.
Yeah, so book a call with Lindsay.
That's right. Yeah, the calendar link that's live from the website will go directly to my calendar.
Yeah, so I think it's a fairly comprehensive guide from why you would design, why you get a design, to how the whole thing works. So, guys, what's in the plan for the next few weeks, months? What's been happening?
Yeah, I'm stoked to be involved in this mural project. I'm an art school grad, and I've been illustrating a lot lately as a method of getting out of the madness and creating very whimsical, fun, imaginary designs. And I'm really just having a really good time doing these illustrations, and I want to blow them up huge on buildings and make murals. So getting this opportunity to get an eye into how do I weave in the gardens and murals, because this is something that I've been thinking about all year. Right? In February, I was talking about this sort of project in Edmonton with a lady that does children's education. How can we get, because here in Canada, of course, our gardens only last for a very small time. And then how do we get that feeling of a garden in those spaces? So having the mural and the garden combination is a really beautiful thing. So that's one thing that I'm doing. I'm working with another storyteller, video producer, who wants some of my drone photography from another project that I did. So getting acquainted with other people who require storytelling, meeting with people that are very well versed in getting grants, right? And how the storytelling before and after documentation is so important when you want to get a grant. So that's another project that I'm working on. And then finding myself a home. But I found my nursery a home. That was the third project. It's like, what am I going to do with my, now second orchard that I've invested a ton of money in? That at least this one's coming with me, but where is it going? So really excited that today perhaps I found a home for all those guys, and it's an opportunity for me to design in the foothills. And it's a very interesting climate there. there's a lot of wildlife pressure. It's a full-scale farm, so I can start to incorporate a lot of the things that I haven't been able to because I didn't have my own homestead. I'm going to be able to harvest, all the plants off at the top of the pond, and I'm going to be able to build soil. I'm hoping I can do, a composting toilet for myself and start to work with that as well and incorporate that. So I'm feeling grateful that it looks like I'm going to have a piece of land where I can, practice what I'm preaching and also document that process to share it with others right from that bare land, nothing going on state, fully lumpy, full of, native plants and wild weeds, we'll say, and grasses, quackgrass too. So it's going to be an interesting project to be able to do that step by step and just show other people, okay, this is how you start. Where do you start? This is how you do it. So, yeah, stoked.
Looking forward to seeing the videos.
Right?
Yeah.
So for me, the next few weeks is all largely about 3 main activities. I've got like 5 or 6 install jobs that I'm working on presently. So that's going to keep me busy all through July and August and September and October and November. So that'll be continuing work. But the main activities on my farm will be harvesting. And then the next main activity on my place will be to plant all of the vegetables that need to go in the ground for fall harvest. So it's starting the next round of succession planting on my place. So that, and as I mentioned, Julia's partner Sean is going to be here. So we've got a lot of activities associated with accommodating him here, as well as Julia. Just creating that extra space for the third person to be working on the farm, and then incorporating him and his capabilities into the business. He works in construction. So I'll be well able to do a lot of the projects on my place that I need to in my barn and those types of activities all through the rest of summer and into fall.
Class. Guys, thanks very much for going through that with us tonight. That was episode 100.
Hey!
So I'm having a wee beer to celebrate. So yeah, for me, again, like I said, I've sort of pivoted the business slightly. So we'll see how that works out. Yeah, I'm just taking it easy for a while. Get my own place up to scratch. Yeah, I have 3 weeks off, so hopefully plenty of gardening done in that time.
Awesome.
So yeah, guys, for everyone listening, thanks very much. Again, them links will be in the description if you want to speak to me or you want to get a design with Permaculture Canada. And I'm back next week. I have a great podcast recorded on storytelling with Candlelit Tales. They basically tell Irish mythology stories.
Awesome.
So we were chatting to the MDC. Basically, we were chatting about the use of land in Irish mythology, and then how we as permaculture practitioners can tell our own stories. So that was really interesting, but left field, but it was really cool. And Dave Spicer, the Earth Mover, and then with Steve Kuntz as well. So I'll definitely get them edited, and I got the sheep one finally edited out, so that came out yesterday. That was an interesting one. Getting into the weeds with sheep. So if you want to check that out as well, guys, thanks you very much again for your time. I really appreciate it. And for those listening, I'll see you shortly, and catch us on the live in August as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Cormac. It's always
thanks, guys.